All right, guys, welcome back to AJ's Animal World. We're just gonna jump right into this video. We're gonna be rehousing my Talil Tecatl Kallenbergi, otherwise known as the Veracruz Red Rump. And you can see her booty is just a gorgeous red. She's got a nice dark black coloring to the legs with a little gray tint and then sort of a rose carapace. She's going into an 8 by 8.5 by 11-inch glass enclosure, something a little bigger than her cricket container. And we're gonna spice it up a little bit. We're gonna go ahead and plant this lemon ball sedum, one of my favorite plants. It almost has the appearance of a little succulent, very gorgeous. And some cork bark there to structure the burrow. Now we all know we set up these enclosures how we would like them, but the tarantulas have a tendency to totally rearrange. I'm going to be using a mixture of Reptisoil, peat moss, cocoa fiber, and a little bit of sphagnum moss. This stuff already has springtails in it. Springtails are very important to the enclosures I set up, as the springtails will break down any waste inside the enclosure, and they're also going to eat any mold that starts up. So I get a lot of comments about potential mold. Guys, I have zero mold issues no matter how I set these up. As long as those springtails are in there, they just devour the mold. So we're just scooping her up right here, getting her out of the way. Let's take a little look at her. She's just gorgeous. I love her. One of my favorite spiders for sure. And she's getting quite large, so she's very deserving of this new enclosure. I'm just going to reuse that old substrate. There's no reason not to. It's got her pheromones in it, and it's not something that I would do if this was a different spider's old soil. I would definitely not put it in this spider's enclosure. So we're going to start here by just raking out that first bag. Nice and smooth here. Took me a little while to figure out exactly how I was going to structure the den here, and I want to make sure I make it nice and appealing and also deep. So as soon as we introduce her to this environment, she just goes right down in there and immediately begins to dig. So I rearranged these pieces a couple of times here just to make the opening kind of look like one full piece of like a rotting log or some sort of natural root system or something like that that would sort of bubble up and create a little hole where she could go down into. Adding some more soil to the back here to create a shelf for the plantings. I want that sedum to be nice and thick in the back corner, spreading towards the front. This is going to deter her from going up on top of the sedum and trying to dig down in the back corner or something like that. And I'm just watering this stuff in as I go. This is basically the bottom layer. Typically, you don't really want to spray down your tarantula's enclosure, and you also want to do a lot of research on the specific type of tarantula that you're trying to rehouse. Some of them need to be bone dry. This particular species likes it a little bit moist. For the purpose of structuring this initial build, I'm just using a lot of water to hold it in place and to feed the plants. So you can see here the sedum will just be laid down on the top, and it will begin to root in directly where it's laid on top of the soil. It does have some long root systems already in place. We'll just go ahead and tuck those down in the soil so they can immediately start to absorb water. But for the most part, this plant should just grow like a carpet across the surface, and anywhere that it grows out and falls over and lays down, it'll begin to reroot itself at that point and then just continue to propagate. It'll get to a point where we will start to trim it out to the areas that we don't want it, and ultimately it'll grow upwards about 3 to 4 inches. So it'll create a nice, thick, very visually appealing border in that backside area. Now I'm going to be leaving the front of this enclosure bare because the tarantula, if she uses the burrow, and starts to dig, she'll pull the dirt from that back corner and bring it to the front and just start to dump it outside the front of the hole. If I were to put any sort of plants in the front, they would just get covered up. This is pretty typical of most spiders that will dig. And like I said, she's going to rearrange it just how she wants it. But I'm really liking how this is looking so far. I love the contrast between that lemon lime color and the dark substrate. And I can't wait to see it once it really takes hold and starts to propagate. We're going to add a couple small pieces in the front just to give it that little bit of touch and a little sense of foreground there. And then a couple small pieces of cork bark here just to add a little something. And yeah, I think this is turning out really well. It's looking very natural. Of course, we're going to want a water dish in there. That's true for all tarantulas. You're going to want to make sure that they have access to fresh water. And we'll go ahead and just set it on the shelf because I want this tank to settle in for about an hour before we put the tarantula in it. All of that extra moisture that we used to initially build it, that's all going to come down towards the bottom, and it's going to create a more proper humidity level when the tarantula first enters its new home. So look at that, guys. Gorgeous. I'm just loving how this is turning out so far. Now, as we wait, I've got a little bonus here for you. We cleaned out the old cricket container that the Kallenbergie was in, and we're going to go ahead and rehouse our Pamphibedius macala. This is such a cool spider, and as you can see right here, it's got a crazy feeding response. As soon as I start to touch it, it will immediately attack whatever's touching it, just expecting a nice fat meal. Normally it's my tongs with a little dubia roach or a cricket, but it's just kind of funny. This is the type of spider that will literally wrestle and roll around with its food. Very, very dramatic. It's almost like a little puppy dog right here. Just kind of stands up and holds on to the paintbrush, just waiting and waiting for that little meal to come. But sorry, buddy, we're not feeding at the moment. We're just gonna scoop you up here and get you into your new environment. I don't have a big plan for this rehouse. I'm just going to keep it simple. It's not going to be under direct lights. There's not going to be any live plants in here. And this is just mostly because it's a temporary enclosure. This spider is going to grow significantly. They can reach adulthood in just up to a year or maybe even under a year. And I'm using some old material here, a piece of grapevine, a little chunk of cork bark, and an old piece of driftwood here. So I'm going to see what I can do with just these couple of things. Again, it's going to be the spider that does the most decorating in the next few weeks. So I'm going to go ahead and create 2 burrows here just so she has an option. This is going to be a significant amount of room for her compared to that little deli cup. And I want her to just have some options in here. If she feels more inclined under one side than the other, she can comfortably set up her little home. If she sets it up in the right corner and then wanders around over the next few weeks and decides she wants to be on the other corner, she has that option. Those are options that she didn't really have in such a confined space before. But it is important when you have those small, tiny slings. You don't want to create an enclosure that's too big because you do want to be able to monitor them and find them when it comes to feeding. And of course, always keep a water dish inside your tarantula's enclosure. They will drink, and it's very important that they do drink prior to a molt. Now, some people get this confused with having to water the enclosure or mist it down or add moisture when their spider's in pre-molt. This is not going to help your spider. If anything, this is going to hurt your spider. It needs to have already drank in the water or consumed water from its prey before that molt process happens. So if this spider ends up a female, she's going to be a nice dark brown colored spider. If it ends up being a male, it will be a dark spider with just beautiful pink and purple hues to the top of it. The carapace and half of the legs will just be a gorgeous, bright starburst color. I mean, I think that was the common name when I bought the tarantula, was starburst something. I tend to refer to them all as their Latin names just to educate myself as I go along. We'll put her up on the shelf here, and I'm just realizing that we should go ahead and switch that label. I tried to peel it off there, but it didn't work, so we'll just go ahead and print one out. I got this little label printer for 20 bucks at Walmart, and I think the film rolls are only like $1.50, so it's pretty cheap, and I recommend you do it just so you can keep track of all of your spiders. As your collection grows, you're gonna wanna know those Latin names just so you can do proper research and keep up with the best environment for your specific spider. These are all my slings here. They're not under a direct light. All right, and this is the moment of truth here. We're gonna introduce our Tarantula Kallenbergi to her new environment. Now, when you're trying to manipulate a spider, it's best to make contact with the brush and then try to maintain that contact as opposed to just pushing and prodding along. So you can see I touch the brush down on the cup and then I'm just sliding it forward, and she gets the picture. As soon as that front leg touches out onto the substrate, she'll be comfortable enough to just scoot down into the enclosure. And you can see here she immediately discovers her little cavern. Tarantulas are sensitive to light, so I put her right in front of it and she was able to recognize a dark little patch and just go right up in there. Now initially your tarantula is going to walk all over the enclosure just checking everything out, but ultimately they're going to start their little burrow in the most appealing section, and hopefully that's going to be the burrow that we've already started here. I'll make sure to include a couple clips here so we can see exactly what she does after about a week. Hard to tell if she's getting a drink right there, but she did go over and check out the water bowl and then just continued to walk along and check out her environment. You can see she doesn't quite know how she feels about the Seedum. She went up on it for a second and then just crawled right back into her little cavern. She looks so cool in this new enclosure, and I'm so happy I did it this way. Hopefully this gives you guys some inspiration. Now, as you can see right here, it's nighttime. I set up the camera because I wanted to do a little time lapse of what she first did her first night in the enclosure. And to my delight, she immediately took to the little burrow and began to excavate. And this shot right here is about a week later, and as you can see, she completely covered the water dish. As to be expected, she was going to take that dirt from the back and bring it up to the front. She actually would come out the front and make a little right turn and start to bury it at the very tip of the Seedum where that water dish was. So we'll just have to chalk that water dish up and put a new one in there. I'm not going to go in and unbury it and mess anything up. As you can see, as she moves along, she puts down a little silk netting everywhere she goes. And they'll use this to feel for prey items and to also put out their pheromones and stuff like that. So at this point, I'm just going to leave it alone and let her totally do what she wants to this enclosure. The only thing I'll do from here on out is basically just trim the Seedum as it gets too large. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. It was so fun to make. I hope you're inspired. And yeah, just have fun with it. All right, guys, I'll catch you next time.